Hi, everybody. Welcome to Parenting Village's collaborative chat series. Parenting Village is a program of Jewish Family Services of Rochester. We're a local nonprofit organization that seeks to connect and support all caregivers and families in Rochester. I'm the Parenting Village Board President, Katie Malarkey, and our chat series this summer is a result of having to cancel this year's Family Fest. So in an effort to preserve the educational and fundraising parts of our Family Fest, we will chat today, and then you'll hear about some ways that you can help Parenting Village. Our chat topic today is talking with your children about racism. I'm excited to have the absolute honor to talk with Calvin Eaton, director and founder of 540 West Main. Calvin, can you share a little bit about your wonderful organization and the work that you do there?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and I'm really happy to be chatting. As you mentioned, my name is Calvin Eaton, and I am the founder and director of 540 West Main Inc. And we are a grassroots nonprofit organization that started in 2016. And for the last 4 years, we've evolved, of course, as startup organizations go. But really our focus, especially now and over the last 4 years, has really been as an education brand and a nonprofit organization that's really committed to providing education and content that is rooted in social justice and anti-racism frameworks. So our courses over the last 4 years and our programming covers a wide variety of cultural and social lifestyle topics and themes, but at the core of a lot of our work is really thinking about justice for all, accessibility, social justice, and anti-racism. And my work has really sort of evolved as well as a person who has a background in early childhood education, but also business and management and administration from RIT. And then I also went to get a second graduate degree in early childhood education from Middle Tennessee State University. And in 2016, after being back in Rochester for a few years, really was looking at community and thinking about how I could merge all of my different interests as an educator and as a content creator, but also as a people person and someone who grew up in Rochester and has seen a lot of change in Rochester, but also have noticed a lot of areas where we can do better as a community, as people. And really 540 is really helping provide education for people around systemic inequities, around interpersonal conversations and dialogues, and really educating people on thinking about our history, the history of Rochester, the history of segregation, the history of how our communities have shaped and why, and how throughout history, Rochester has really been so integral to civil rights and also been complacent and condoned discriminatory practices that have created neighborhoods and communities that still to this day are segregated. So we are, have shifted now to virtual in the last month since the onset of COVID. So we are just now vacating our founding space at 540 West Main Street, and we will have an administrative office only on King Street, and I'm really very much still committed to supporting Rochester and the Susan B. Anthony District overall, but really also now this transition to virtual allows us to tailor and open our programs to people all around the country. And these conversations about implicit bias, about structural racism, about parents who are white, who are raising Black, Indigenous, or other children of color, and what that means for their families and how they navigate that. And so we're really excited now that we now are in this virtual space to really be able to create a lot more programming and circle back to working more closely with parents of school-age children. And I'm just really excited that we have some really amazing programming opportunities coming up over the next several months that really speak to parents and how parents can teach their children to be anti-racist.
Thank you, Calvin. I highly recommend anybody that is interested to check out your website at 540wmaine.org, because all the classes that you mentioned coming up, I think could really be helpful to everybody that's hopefully listening today. So when we were trying to develop the questions that we would discuss today, the board and staff decided that it might actually be most helpful to poll some of the children in our lives to see what types of questions that they might have about racism. So these are just 4 of the questions that came up when asking both our own families and the families that we serve at Parenting Village. One that came up often was, how are kids affected by racism? Do you have any thoughts on that, Calvin?
Yeah, well, race and racism is this social construct that is, for as much as it is something that's been created by humans, right? It's very real, and our identities are wrapped up in this social construct of race, and talking about, this preposition that some people, based on the color of their skin, are superior to other people. We know that is not true. We know that as human beings, we are all more alike than we are different biologically and genetically. We're the same. And so, when we think about racism and how it impacts children, those of us who are people of color, who are Black, who are Indigenous, depending on where you came from in the pipeline of the development and the structure of the United States, globally, we know that you're born into this sort of sea of difference. And from very early on, we know research tells us that children as young as 2 and 3 years old, or even younger, are beginning to be able to ascertain differences in terms of cultural differences, social differences, and how people of different skin tones, of different races, ethnicities are treated differently subtly. And there's been studies that you can research children as young as 2 years old who may be attributing negative stereotypes or biases or perceptions. They may say that there's this very popular, the doll test, where the doll that's most beautiful is the white doll. And so that tells us that psychologically, even though as people, as families, we might be saying that we don't espouse racist ideals to our children, or that we are teaching our children to treat everyone with respect and value them no matter who they are, we know that if we're not having intentional conversations around anti-racism and what that means to our young children, that they are being taught, whether we know it or not, by society. They're being taught in very covert and seemingly unseen ways by the people around them, when you go to the store, when you go to the park. And so that's why it's so important for families to not rely on this sort of this thought that we don't see color, right? We should, and we do see color. We see differences. The important thing is to acknowledge these differences and to help our children to really understand that because of this insidious preposition or thought of racism, that there are times, there are people, there are structures that are unequal, that there are privileges that some families have that others don't have, and that race is real, and the implications of race being, so race as a social construct, it is a social construct, and that has very real implications on the lived experiences of people differently, right? So it's important that we are able to find the language, that we're able to have very real conversations to our children, whether they be school aged or preschool aged, about those differences, helping them to understand that they will notice things, and that when they do notice things, when they do see things, that to create a situation and to create a relationship, an environment where they feel comfortable talking to you, when they notice like, hey, my friend is brown or my friend's hair looks different than mine, that's okay. That's them being curious. That's them wanting to learn more and to understand. And that's not the time to dismiss the conversation, but really to use that as a way to open up the dialogue, that seeing differences, acknowledging differences is not, it's not wrong in and of itself. What's wrong is when we attribute value or assign value greater than or less than to those differences. And I think that the capacity of young children to understand that that's not okay, they have more capacity than we give them credit for. And so oftentimes the scared, or the insecurity or the fear that we have is more for us as adults, and we may be projecting that onto children. So that's why it's important to be able to just start to engage in that dialogue. Purchase books for your children that center characters that are non-white. Picture books that showcase the diversity and the beauty of all children of all different ethnicities and colors and hair texture and skin tones, and talk about skin tone, and start to talk about how there is this concept socially of race, but that all people have value, that all people are beautiful, that no person, because of their difference, is better or greater than or less worthy or more worthy than anyone else. And that's really the time to begin to instill those values in children, because society is instilling them whether we know it or not.
Thank you, Calvin. That was beautifully said, and I think it's going to resonate with a lot of the families that watch this. And actually, it segues really well into our second kiddo's question, which is really boils down to looking at the systemic racism that we've seen locally. The question was, why are so many people in the suburbs white, but there are more people of color in the city of Rochester? You have to unmute, Calvin. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You're fine.
That's it's a great question, and one that many adults find themselves asking or not even thinking about, right? That this concept of race policy or racist policy and law that created segregation, that separated us because of, that said that Black children and white children could not be in the same school at a time. There are so many books that are children's books, picture books that have the kids-friendly language, but that tell real-life stories of how not only was it a time when communities were segregated and it was the law, that it was built into the law, and even though so many of those books talk about how the laws were passed and how the Civil Rights Act was passed and how schools were integrated, right? I think that one of the things that we can do as adults and parents and caretakers is to also say that even though that happened, there were still people, there were still communities, there were still systems and governments that still wanted to keep us separate, and that created policies and laws and rules, regulations that said that prevented us from coming together, that created systems, that created highways, that really told some families that they couldn't live in Pittsford, right, or Victor. And even though that law is now has been considered illegal, that still doesn't mean that things automatically went back to where we're integrated. And so finding the appropriate books, the appropriate sort of entry point to help children to understand that even though we're now 30 years later after a particular law was passed or found to be against the civil rights of a person, that there were still things that were not done. And so that means that us today, we have to take it upon ourselves as communities to say, how do we retrofit some of the long-standing implications of segregation locally in our communities. How do we have conversations about that? What can it, what does it, what do you do? You can talk to your children about like city council process and the law process and like how do you write, let's write a letter to our city council member to say that we live in one community. We see that this community is very of one homogenous race or culture. We want to see a difference and use opportunities. I think now that we're all talking about schools going hybrid or some people deciding to keep their children home virtually, these are the opportunities now where we can begin to scaffold in some of these types of activities into like a social studies conversation, right? Or history conversation where you can actually do some reading about something that's age appropriate and then work with your child to write a letter or your children to write a letter to city council, to your senator, and have your children send that letter. In the process of writing a letter, formatting it for them, putting it in an envelope, putting a stamp on it and say, here's the action that we're going to take. And there's just so much value in that. You're touching on so many different learning modalities. You're touching into writing and reading and research and social studies and cultural studies, right? And you can really embed some of those sort of more traditional, school specific goals and outlines with a current event. And there's ways that you can do that no matter where your child is in terms of their development, whether it's, pre-K student, a middle age or middle group 4 through 6 or 6 to 8. You can begin to build upon those conversations as your children are older and even for younger students. And you can do intersectional studies where you may have younger students working with their younger sibling on a project, a family project, and really get the whole family involved as you start to think about segregation, think about redlining and what that meant, and then what that still means, always bringing it back to present day. And there are no shortage of examples that you can pull from the internet that can help you to do that as parents and families.
Thank you, Calvin. It made me think of a plug for another local business. Hippocampo Books on South Avenue is a great resource for those with younger kids looking for books about persons of color. So I definitely recommend taking some of your suggestions and going there. So this was a question that came up with some of our younger kids, and it actually came up a few times. It was the why question. So like, why do I have a different skin color? Some kids have asked, why isn't everyone the same color? Why am I darker? Why am I so pale? Like, just look, like, I think those first steps of starting to realize that there is a superficial difference and how to answer that in a way that maybe isn't that, look past the color, which I think everybody was taught 20 years ago, but something to really have that conversation about embodying and being excited about those differences.
Yeah, and there's so much in that, and thinking about, how beautiful is the world that we all are not the same. And I'm very much a spiritual and person who believes in God and Jehovah and the Bible, and thinking about creation and how we were all created to be different, and that's a good thing, right? And I think that when you start to think about that how, putting it in language for children, like, think about it, if we all were the same, how boring that would be. The fact that we are different, and that when different people come together and they create life, and those conversations, how you can teach that in a way that, simple with paint, you can have shades of brown, and you can have a darker brown, and then you can have a white, and then you can literally on a piece of paper, using that white paint and black paint, or white paint and brown paint, organize or recognize how the different pigments you add to that, you mix and you see different tones, right? That's a great simple lesson to for young children to sort of demonstrate how you mix different colors together to get different shades. And that's the beauty of genetics and humanity and biology. And again, as age appropriate, you can begin to incorporate different pieces of science, different pieces of cultural studies within those conversations, and then do an activity that's, developmentally appropriate for that child to really build the capacity to understand that there are differences. There's differences for humans, just like other animals, like there's different species of animals, and that whole conversation, and really help them to begin to value difference, that my darker skin is just as beautiful as your lighter skin, or your blonde hair, or your brown hair, or your dark hair, or your short and curly hair, or your long and straight hair. All of it is different, but it's all beautiful, and that everything fits each person for the best, right? Some of everybody has different aspects of themselves that works for them, and that we should support everyone's beauty and everyone's difference, and we all look different, and some people are taller and shorter, and some bodies are bigger and some bodies are smaller, and like all of that is okay. And I think that the more that we talk about the difference, but really incorporating into that conversation that it's not a bad thing to be different, right? That's where you begin to help children to have empathy, to have understanding, to really, push back against the narrative that certain body types or certain abilities physically, right? Some children are in wheelchairs. Some people need a wheelchair to help them walk. And aren't we thankful that we have the tools and the devices that help people to be able to get around if they can't walk the way that maybe you can walk? Or I'm someone who wears glasses. What if they're wearing glasses for me? It would be hard for me to see, but the fact that there's a tool of glasses helps me be able to see. Maybe you don't need glasses, and that's okay, right? So I think that the more that we're able to build that language of difference is okay, difference isn't less than, that's how you help children to be able to find beauty in their difference, to find beauty in their darker skin, or beauty in their shade of brown, beauty in their lighter skin tone, or whatever that might be. And it to not be, the more that we reinforce that through imagery that's diverse, I think that children will begin to be able to say, like, we're different and that's okay. And, I think that subconsciously, when we don't have that difference, right, then you begin to almost in a covert way or an unconscious way, if all you have are books of all the same people, are you saying that these people are better than other people because you don't have the representation? You might not be vocally saying that, but the fact that you don't, the omission can create a system of hierarchy in the minds of a young child. So just the more opportunities that parents are able to connect their children and their families with different cultures, different experiences, the more you begin to chip away at this sort of like hierarchy of one is better. Because when you immerse us all, you begin to see that it's different, but we all can take a part in different cultures, and no one culture is better because we're always around it, right? And so I think that, again, these conversations not only require word and thought, but also action, right? So in that conversation, are you as a caretaker, as families, creating opportunities in which your children are around different people from yourself and not around the same type or culture of people all the time? And that can look like race and ethnicity, that can look like gender, that can look like religion, that can look like religions, that can look like food, restaurants, that can look like experiences. So, one of the things that I always tell people, that what I love about Rochester is that there's always some event, there's always, even from free all the way to a cost, in which you can find an opportunity to immerse yourself in an experience that's different from what you normally would immerse yourself in. And we have so many opportunities, even during COVID, that we can do something outdoors or a museum now where we can begin to start to incorporate different types of activities and different people into our lives in really organic and thoughtful ways.
Awesome. Thank you, Calvin. Really well said. All right, our last question comes from one of our older kiddos from online, and they were asking, why are some police unfair to Black people? Do you have any thoughts on how we can have that particular discussion?
Yeah, that's a really powerful question. And, you know, I think that there's so many layers to that in terms of how would you answer that. I think that for one, you can go as far back as to talking about sort of the history of policing, and if it's an older student, help them do some research on, like, why do we as a culture, like, why do we in the United States specifically, why do we have the police in general? Like, what is the role of the police? Sort of historically, what has been the role? There's a lot of content there. You can look at how the role of police has changed over time. You can also use it as an opportunity to look at other countries and other cultures, and what do police do? How do the police interact in other countries, right? And maybe Finland, or how does the police look like and work in South Africa, and how does it look different from policing in the United States? And then you can begin to have really real conversations right now that people are having, in which policing here in this country sometimes is not equitable, is not fair, and that some people are policed different than other people. And that is real. That's real factual information. And you can begin to help your children to think about, like, how would we like to see the police act differently or treat people differently, right? And you can really begin to have some really real conversations, imaginative conversations, where we can think about, in a reimagined or a perfect world, what do we do? What might we do different if someone does something bad, or something that's, like, the law says is not legal, right? Should they go to prison for 10 years? Should we have another outcome as a society? And you can begin to have these sort of open-ended questions with especially older students to get them thinking, like, you know, some states have the death penalty, some states don't. What might we do differently, right? So there's so much dialogue, I think, listening to students' concerns, again, not dismissing those types of conversations. It requires parents and caretakers and families and extended families to really begin to maybe have some uncomfortable dialogue, and to really take time to say, that's a great question. Let's research it together, right? Let's do some reading together. Let's watch an age-appropriate video on YouTube together, right? And explore those conversations. And I think that the more we get comfortable doing that as adults, the more that we will be able to begin to help our children to have these types of dialogue again, because children they don't exist in a vacuum, right? Even if you don't watch TV a lot, children have peers, they have social media, they have the internet, and they are coming across, or they're hearing conversations that maybe you're having and not knowing that they're listening to you. And so it's really important for us to use these opportunities where so many of us are maybe working from home or working in different ways than we were 5 months ago. We're maybe together with our families, with our children, more than we typically are, to use these times to have this very real, honest dialogue with our children, and not dismissing these conversations. I think that if families can leave this dialogue with knowing anything, is that the time is now to have these conversations with our children when they ask. And even if they're not asking these questions, why are you not broaching these questions with them? what do you think about the Black Lives Matter protest? What do you think about XYZ that happened, you know, right? What do you think about this situation? And that begins to help you to understand where your child is with it. And then you begin to explore how you can support them. Because don't assume that because they may not have come to you with the topic that they don't have a thought about it or an opinion.
I agree with everything you said, Calvin. Thank you. Having the conversations as soon as you can, and having that diversity in your home, even if it's through books for small children, I hope will make a difference. So thank you. So thank you, Calvin, for having this collaborative chat today. All of your thoughts and suggestions were very enlightening and uplifting. And personally, I truly hope all the best for you in your new fully virtual journey at 540 West Main. You do amazing work there, and I think you're going to continue to succeed. And then a quick spiel. Thank you to everybody who was able to watch the video today. The series of chats was one of the many virtual events that we've hosted throughout July and August as our way of trying to take our annual Family Fest online to continue to connect families with the local resources like 540 West Main in a playful social fundraising event. The Family Fest is usually our largest fundraiser of the year, so we really do need support now to help continue all of our programming branches for the next year. Our nurture circles and connection programming are all offered free to participants, and allowing everybody to benefit from peer support and connection whenever they need. In order to train and staff those programs, we need your help. So please consider supporting Parenting Village by clicking the donate button either on our Facebook page, or you can visit our website at parentingvillage.org/donate. So thank you again, Calvin, for the chat today, and for everyone who had the chance to watch it. I hope that you stay well, and much love on your next journey.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.